How'd You Create That is supported by the Open Institute for Social Science. It is a podcast about the process behind creating a work of art. We are in the season finale of the very first season of How'd You Create That? It feels like yesterday when we were trying to figure out how to set up the microphones for recording, and now here we are, 5 episodes later. Thank you so very much for staying with us through this season. I am your host, Alfa, and as our final guest for season 1, we have Smriti Ravindra, the author of The Woman Who Climbed Trees. She is a Nepali Indian writer and a Fulbright scholar. Her fiction and journalism have been published globally, including in the US, India, and Nepal. The Woman Who Climbed Trees is her first novel, and the book won the 2023 TATA Literature Live First Book Award Fiction. In this episode, we talk about womanhood, which is a central theme in her story. How can we write from memory? How her book came to be the way it is today, and many, many other things. Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you so much for joining me all the way from India. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling really good. The weather is lovely. And yeah, it's good. It's Saturday. I love Saturday, so I'm in a really good mood.
Wow, great. So it was a good decision to record on a Saturday.
Yes.
Could you tell us something about your book, The Woman Who Climbed Trees, which we will be talking
Um,
about today?
it's a book that is set in the 90s, set in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, early 90s of Kathmandu. It amongst other things, talks about what migration means and what home means for women, and how marriages can be institutes of displacement for women, I think. Yeah, and it's a book that took me several years to write, and it's my first novel.
Wow.
Is that a good enough introduction?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Marriage as an institution of displacement. Wow. That's a big thought. Well, also a very deep thought, and maybe a thought that we have not thought about enough in our
Mhm.
world. And I loved reading the book. And even though I'm not Mina and we live in very different times, there were so many moments when I could, connect with her, the protagonist of your story. So that was
Do you want to tell me how you could connect with her?
So it's this, of course, we live in very different times, and our circumstances are different, the context is different, the time is, of course, very, very different. But I felt like, there was this faint connection of seeking for something. And, there's this one line in the book that I've made a note of. There are many notes that I've made, and one part where she is wondering if Manmohan likes her or not. And the first thing that came into my mind was, oh, why are we women always have to be concerned about whether men like us or not? I think that's something that really comes up all the time. And even like when the movie Barbie came out last year, that was also one of the things that people were talking that, Barbie is always worried about whether other people like her or not. And I think that kind of fits together with something in your story as well.
Very classy answer, and I agree with you that is that uh I, sometimes I think it's definitely something that is way more prominent in a woman's life. But sometimes I also think it's human desire to be liked. Men also want to be liked.
Absolutely.
And right. And I think in a woman's case, sometimes that wanting to be liked becomes a little problematic because she's becomes very dependent on the person who likes or does not like. Whereas while it's not that men are not influenced by that, their dependency might be a little lesser. But I think the desire to be liked is a universal thing, simply because we are social creatures. So we desire to belong to somebody. You know, belonging is a universal desire, I think. But in a women's situation, I think belonging comes with many, many more implications than it comes with for a man. And I think that's where the difficulties probably lie. But yes, so yeah,
True. Belonging can sometimes become complicated.
yes. It is. It is. It's complicated in the sense that it's complicated if you belong, and it's complicated if you don't belong. And
Mm.
uh, as human beings, I think that's the balance we're constantly seeking. Is we want to be independent and we want to belong simultaneously. And
Yeah.
so, all
Yeah.
right. Anyways, we're just chatting away now.
No, it's a podcast after all. So, they say sometimes we can only find the beginning after things have ended. And now that your book has, come out in a physical form and shape, like maybe perhaps an end of some kind. So I was just wondering, where did it begin and how did it take the form that it is in right now?
Where did it begin? I think it began, gosh, I think parts of it began when I was in school, if I'm
Wow.
not mistaken. I think so. Uh, uh, the friendship of Sachi and Preeti
Hmm.
is modeled after a friendship uh, I think I sort of experienced while I was in school. So, but things began. I've always wanted to write, so in that sense, things began very, very early on. But the book itself began because um, my mom passed away, and I kind of missed her, and I wanted to keep in touch with her. So I started writing about and to her in a journal. And I think the germ of, oh, maybe I should write a novel began because I was journaling about just life and how I felt and stuff like that. Um, and so that's how it began. So the book's been in the process of being written for like a long time, more than a decade. Um, but And the funny thing is, I don't think I would have ever known I had a book and it wouldn't have ended. And this question that you asked about knowing the beginning when it ends wouldn't have come up because it wouldn't have ended ever. Except that a friend of mine read it one day and then she said, "You need to stop writing because you are done. This is a book. You can't keep
Mm.
writing the same thing forever." So I think what really helped me was having a third person tell me what was going on because I was too close to what I was doing for me to ever know that I could wrap it up here. I never knew where to wrap it. So I think it was really nice to have somebody tell me that this is a point you can wrap up at. And that just shows you the importance of a reader at all steps of your life, that you need, that readers can be a very collaborative the relationship between a writer and a reader can be very collaborative because here was me writing, and here was my first reader telling me you need to wrap it up. So that's how
That's how it began, and that's how it's a book
that's
now
how it ended. Yes.
that we can read and see and connect with and, travel with you in your thoughts. I also love that you shared that so much of the book started when you were like in school, when you were young. I think so many people also write from memory. I also like to write from memory sometimes, though it's not one of my strongest aspects because I feel like I've already forgotten so many things. So from a craft perspective, for somebody who would like to write from memory, how would you suggest we access those like parts or memories from the past which are like maybe like 20, 15, or maybe 30 or even many years before to write about it?
So for me, I think memory is my only tool.
Mm.
And like you, I have, no, I'm sorry, I take that back. I have terrible memory. I cannot remember things. And details slip me all the time. When I say memory, I'll have a fleeting 1 second image in my head of a particular day. I rarely remember anything, but that fleeting 1 second memory, I have realized over time, it has immense emotional weight. Like I only remember things that have emotional weight in them. And I forget everything about it. For instance, I really, really want to write about this one weird image I have in my head of probably when I was really, really small.
Mm.
And I do not remember the person. I don't remember anything, but I remember sitting on the stairs of my Maiti Devi Ghar.
Mm.
And that's all I remember. And I remember that there was somebody else with me who was not a family member. I think it was a neighborhood friend. Um, but because that's in my head, I have a feeling I'm going to end up writing about it one day. So I do feel that while remembering is a great, great asset, it's a very strong strength. Forgetting is just as big an asset. And
Mm.
that to forget is to allow space for the imagination to step in and to make things up. And that's why I will never be a nonfiction writer. I'll always be a fiction writer because all my memories are supplemented by my imagination, and that's perfectly fine. So I was going to tell you, Alpha, that if you uh, are daunted by the fact that you don't have memories which you can access, in their entirety, good, because then your present self can go into it and alter it and make it whatever you will, and the memory will still be a part of it. So, so I don't think that's that big of a problem. I have some really difficult issues, like I can't remember things. I also think I have a terrible vocabulary for a writer. Um, and so, which means that every now and then I start struggling for words. I'm like, I'm struggling. And then in that struggle, I feel that a sentence is born, which,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't be there if there wasn't the struggle. So I
Um,
really do feel gaps and uncertainties in life are okay. It allows us to play around with ourselves and do stuff. I don't.
wow, that's a powerful thought. If remembering is like important, so is forgetting. Yeah, that's so lovely to think.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and and there's a reason we forget. I think we forget bad stuff,
Mm,
and we
yeah.
tend to remember good stuff, and or we tend to remember stuff that really, really matters, and then we forget the riffraff. And I think the riffraff is where our imagination can step in and make it the way we want it to be, rather than how it was. Right. And that's fine. I think that's perfectly okay.
Yeah, that's true. The gaps are where we get to play with our imagination, like you've mentioned. How was the research process for this book like? Like you mentioned, it's set in the 70s, 80s, 90s. So, it could be in a time period that you might not have like firsthand experience of, or you might not be there in that location or that context. So, how do we make up things when, we have not experienced it directly or seen through our eyes?
So you're not going to quite believe this, but most of my research was done sitting in the middle of the bed and zoning out.
Wow.
Absolutely
Zoning
just
out.
zoning out. um, and I think even though the book is set in 70s, 80s, and 90s, well, 80s and 90s I lived through, so that was
Mm.
not that difficult. But most of it, I've just put together what I've heard my family talk about, rather than actually research it physically. So, like I said, my family would, whether it was my parents or my extended family, I would hear them say something. I'll give you an example. I had gone to my um, grandmother's house, my daddy's house, my father's mother's house, and my grandmother mother was already dead by then. And my kaki was washing clothes at the kal, at the chapakal downstairs, and I was just hanging around and chatting with her. And she said, my kaki said that, your grandmother was not very liked by people, but I really liked her. Now, my mom and my grandmother never got along very well. But my kaki and my grandmother, my kaki said, I really liked your grandmother and I had a really good time with her. I was a little surprised because I hadn't heard my mom speak very, very positively about my grandmother. My mom had some difficult times with her. Um, but my kaki was speaking very positively, so I got very curious and I said, "So tell me the stuff I don't know, right?" And she
Mm.
said, "Imagine, your grandfather died when she was still a young girl, and she took care of the family, and she never let me go into the fields, and she did everything, and." She, in some ways, protected all the women of the family by taking on the outside world so that we wouldn't have to take on the outside world. And to me, that was so fascinating that I wrote the story, wrote the section in the book called Love is Just a Thing of the Cities.
Mm.
Um, and it came from that conversation. And, and so my one thing, and I still want to continue to do that if there ever is another book, is to have my ears open, my eyes open. And I think that's the best research. Um, I did read Kathmandu Springs, a book that chronicles what happened in the 1989 1990 revolt. Uh, I read that book for information of what was going on in the country. But again, I used it like I would use a conversation that I had overheard, rather than a
Mm.
research that I would use with fidelity. And so, and then I worked around it. But I think that's the only book I actually read for research. But everything else was things I had heard, things people told me. I would sit and talk to people and say, hey, tell me about when you were younger. Tell me about what happened. How was the 70s? What would you do? And that was it. And that was most of the research. So it's not a very sound research process. Yeah.
Wow. Meet people and ask them. I really liked the part where you said keep your ears open and then ask people like how their life was, because that's like how characters also often live inside the books. Like there are this mundane everyday things that they have to do, maybe work or walk. And that probably doesn't show up in like real-time research. They don't share how people are walking on the road or what they're eating or yeah, I think that would be a very interesting
Yeah.
thing to soak in.
Like right now I'm reading a book so that I have a stronger understanding of uh, the Maoist movement within the hills itself. Like I know, because I lived through most of it in Kathmandu, I know about things that happen outside of Kathmandu in theory through newspapers and through news. But I wanted to know more, so I'm reading. But nowhere do I really find the thing I'm looking for.
Mm,
What I'm looking for is an image of an afternoon that went by when something was happening, because that's what I want to see. But those kind of things, I think, comes from just talking, like asking somebody, tell me. So I'm looking for people who are going to talk to me about it, and hopefully I'll be able to collate some of it. I don't.
Yeah. Asking is such a wonderful tool to use, not just like as a writer, but also as a person. We get to know about a time that we were not around and what happened. I think, yeah, that would be such a wonderful way to
Yeah,
ask.
no, I every time my father comes to visit me, I make it a point now, especially now because he's so old. And I keep telling him, you must tell me about your life before you became my dad, because otherwise we won't know. And
Hmm.
the kinds of things that come out, the kinds of things he's told me, and just casually, things that I wouldn't imagine my father doing or living through or experiencing. And I think that's important. It's in those details that the stories live. So
Yeah, true. The details that the stories live in. I have one more, a very craft related question. So your novel is told from different point of views. We have Mina, we get to know about her, and then we also get to know Mohan, and there is a section that's told from his perspective, and then we have the daughter Preeti, and her voice is like first person perspective. So how did that emerge in your story, playing with these different kinds of point of view? Because usually something that I struggle with is I think about a character, and then I find it easier to follow that one character throughout the story. So just follow their perspective. This is what they see, this is what they feel. And it becomes so much difficult to, I was like, if I have to tell the same story from another point of view, maybe a friend or another character that pops up in the story, I'm like, oh, I don't know what they would feel about, because as people, we only know ourselves and we can only just guess what the other person is thinking. But when we are a writer, we can create that, but I'm like, how do we create that? Like one, like it's the same apple that two characters are seeing, but maybe one person sees something else or the other person sees something else. How do you go about creating these diverse perspectives?
well, first of all, I think we are like 100 people inside one person, right? Every
Mhm.
person is
Mm,
at least maybe 1,000 people in one person. And I think as a writer, you should be able to access as many of them as you can. Um, and for every little bit of saint in us, there is the devil in us. So
mm,
one day talk to your saint and one day talk to your devil.
wow.
And one day talk to the staunch feminist and one day talk to the person who loves the color pink and wants to go shopping for lots and lots of clothes and is vain as hell. So I think one way to create multiple characters is to simply have conversations with yourself. You are multiple characters. And in many ways, I think every character in any book, including my book, is an expression of the author. Like you can't really write outside of it. Your imagination too is yourself. Everything is you. Like everything comes from you. Um, in my book, when I first started writing the novel, it was supposed to be written entirely from Preeti's point of view. That was the plan. And that is my first draft. The first draft of the novel that I have is written entirely from Preeti's point. And when I was writing from her point of view, every now and then I would get stuck because she was talking about her mother. And there was no way on earth that she could have access to the information that her mother would have access to, simply because she was not born then and she hadn't experienced things then. And so she had no access to Meena the younger and Meena the newly married woman. I also didn't know how Preeti, as a young narrator, would talk about something as disruptive as marital sex. She could, and she did in that first draft, she did, but it was a little more distance. So then I felt that I really needed to create Meena as a character, as a point of view that was her own. So then wrote about Meena. So I think I wrote about Preeti, and almost 2, 3 years after I had finished a draft, I wrote about I wrote sections from Meena's point of view, which ended up becoming the largest section in the book, which is a little surprising to me also. Um, And then when I wrote from Mina's point of view, every time she talked about Manmohan, he would just come off as a caricature, flat character because she was so angry with him that there
Mm,
was no way that she could humanize him. She would only see him as, this person who had destroyed her life. But every person is more than just one person, right? So then I was like, if I write Manmohan from Mina's point of view, I'm going to create a one-dimensional character who has no depth. So then I felt I had to write Manmohan from his own perspective so that I could explore his own life. So that's how Manmohan came about. Um, and then I have these little point of views, like the story, like the section, um, Love is just a thing of the cities, or when Kaveri's section, which is just her section, when after her uh, husband has died. Um, so these sections came about because I really wanted every character to be a little more rounded than they tend to be when they're spoken about by somebody else. So if only Meena spoke about Saveri Devi, her mother-in-law, she came out as a hideous woman. But when she tells her own story to Preeti, I am hoping that she's humanized. That um, her own side of the story, she's allowed to tell her own story. And so I think that was very important to me, that everybody be allowed to tell their own story, even if it is for one page. I feel everybody should be allowed to tell their own story, because from somebody else's point of view, you can be somebody very static. You might be wonderful or evil, or we might not see the nuances because we don't know their story. And so that's why there are so many multiple point of view, like so many points of views in the book, because every time I told somebody's story, I'm like, no, no, the poor thing is coming off as so bad. And I don't really
mm,
believe that everybody is so bad. So then I had to write everybody's story. I don't know if you remember, but towards the end of the novel, there is the ADC Gurung story.
yeah.
And right. And earlier, I didn't have his wife's story in it. It was just that she came and she yelled at Meena and she tried to take away the land. And then after I wrote it, I said, what an absolutely boring interaction, because there is no nuance to it. It's just some horrible woman who comes and screams and yells and goes away. Everybody is driven to a point in their life when they scream and yell. Like people don't just start screaming and yelling. So then I felt the need to write her story. So I have Kamla Gurung's story, who is not even any kind of a character in the book, but she takes up, I think, some 5, 6 pages of the book, because I really felt that her story, she had to be allowed to tell her story. And
Mm.
so that's why there are so many, and I know it gets a little confusing sometimes, but that's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. When we look at a character from just one other character's perspective or point of view, yeah, we cannot access them. And I loved when you said, like, creating characters is having conversations with yourself. So yeah, I would love to try that. That sounds so exciting to
Yeah.
me
I
already.
mean, Alpha, you're so sweet right now, but I'm sure deep inside there's another side of you that's absolutely horrible, right?
Yeah, I
I am
get
sure.
maybe. I
And
guess
so
so.
yeah, it has to be. It has to be. Otherwise, we would be really dull people,
Hmm.
and we would have no inner life that's rich and vibrant. And so I think one day write about the wonderful person you are, and one day really write about the horrible person you are, because I'm sure all of us have it,
Yes, we have.
right? So
Yeah, that's true. We have different sides of us, and we may not necessarily show it to anyone, and we may not have to, but they do exist. And yeah, I mean, bringing them out in fiction on the page could be something really fascinating to try. Yeah, the horrible me. Let's see where that goes. I am absolutely loving where the questions are taking us. We're going in so many places that I did not think we would go, but that's, I think, the beauty of having a conversation. Would you like
right.
to read us something now? I feel like this could be a good time to.
Oh yeah, you'd said that. And you know what? Can I just get a copy of my
Yeah,
book?
sure.
Because
I have
I
one
do.
here, but I can't send it to you.
So I'll read the prologue uh, simply because it's short enough to be read. Um, it's a section that works well for reading, I think.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the prologue.
Okay. Should I just start?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Uh, the prologue to The Woman Who Climbed Trees, which is also called The Woman Who Climbed Trees. A man had two children, and one day his wife died. So the man went looking for another wife, but no woman would be burdened by the children, and the man remained unmarried for some years. Then one day the man went to a neighboring village for some work and heard of a family that had a girl of marriageable age. After he had finished his work, the man went up to the family's house and made inquiries about the girl's age, color, and robustness. Satisfied, he offered himself as a groom. He had wealth, he said, and lots of youth left in him. He would take care of the girl, and the girl would take care of the children. Show me the girl said. Show me the children, the girl said, and the man brought his children with him during his next visit. When the girl looked at the children, she fell in love with them. They were good children, shy and calm. They had beautiful, sad eyes, like those of orphans, and they tugged at her heart, and so the girl married the man. For many years, the girl was mother to the sad-eyed children, and eventually their eyes began to glow with joy. They learned mischief, learned songs and dances, played in the fields. They learned to chase after carts and birds. Eventually, they forgot their birth mother and thought of the girl as their real mother. They grew up well, two handsome children. One night, the man could not sleep. It was a moon-filled night, and the rays fell silver upon his wife. The tree outside knocked at the window, quiet and musical. The man stayed up, enjoying the night, and when, around an hour after midnight, his wife pushed aside the covers and stepped off the bed, the man was surprised. The girl put on her slippers. She made her way out the room and toward the front door. She stepped out the house and disappeared. The man stayed behind, confused. The girl returned with the early hours. She did the same the next day, then the day after. The man was very disturbed by his wife's behavior and decided to follow her. One night, after much thought, he tied a thread to the tip of his wife's hair and held the spool in his hand. When she left the bed, the thread on the spool began to unwind and started a white path behind her. After a good interval had passed, the man followed the thread path. The thread went down the lane that crossed the fields and a cluster of huts. It went past the bazaar, past the temple, and followed the river. It stopped by a large peepal tree and climbed its bark. The man was puzzled. What could this mean? Why had the thread climbed the tree? He looked up, and sure enough, there was his wife up on the tree, sitting on its branches, enjoying the wind and the stars. The man hid himself behind some bushes, and when he saw his wife readying to leave, he rushed back home. For a month after that, he followed her every night, and every night the girl climbed the tree and sat on its branches. Her feet dangled under her sari. Some nights she let down her hair, and her hair fell like a waterfall upon her back. The girl was beautiful, and the man was severely in love with her. But despite all this, he was also tormented. What could this mean? What could this mean? Finally, he began to talk about his wife with others. He told his friends, his sisters in law, his brothers. Word spread. Ah, said the people, she must be having an affair. But after many nights of watching the tree, it was clear there was no affair. She must be mad, said others. But all day the girl worked with such surety and skill that insanity had to be ruled out. Then someone said, she must be a witch. Think of it, said someone. We cannot understand anything she does. Why does she marry this man, someone so much older than her? Why does she choose not to have her own children and raise somebody else's? Why do these children love her so? Why does she look more beautiful at night than in the morning? Why does she sit high in a tree? Nobody could answer. The man thought hard about it and decided it was time to let the children know. She does not love you, he said. She is a witch. That is not true, cried the children. She loves us. She feeds us sweets, stitches our clothes, gives us baths, sends us to school, strokes our hair until we fall asleep, and sings in our sleep so we dream sweet. She loves us. Does she? Said the man. Come with me and I will show you. So he took the children along the next night and showed them the girl. She was upon the branches, light as a bird, her hair blowing in the wind, her skin without wrinkles. Now, said the man, is that a woman or a witch? The children stared. They had never seen their mother so lovely, so without worry, so far away, as though she cared nothing for them or for anything they knew. She's a witch, they said, and returned home with their father. The next night, the man, the children, the friends, the sisters-in-law, the brothers, the elders of the family, elders of the village, surprised the wife by springing out of the bushes. When the wife fell off the branch, they gave her a good beating. The wife stared at her husband and said nothing. But when she saw her children, she began to weep. Save me, she cried. But the children, who had never seen their mother look so beautiful, could not step forward. They looked away and stared into the distance in fear. They pushed their fingers into their ears so they would not hear her scream. Then the villagers carried her to the river. The children stared into the distance. They kept their fingers in their ears and did not hear their mother thrashing under the water, nor did they hear the silence when it came.
Thank you so much for reading. The epilogue also is titled The Woman Who Climbed Trees, and it kind of neatly, brings the book to a full circle. When I read the
Mm,
epilogue, I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? Um, it starts off in a very mysterious way, and then it ends in a very haunting and sad way. And I was like, when I was reading it for the first time, I was like, oh, I like what's going to happen next in the book? And it has this element of magic and, surrealism and all of these elements that come, and there are poems and there are songs in the book as well. Um, so how did you decide, you're going to use these magic elements, like surreal elements in the book, along with like real people, like real, like fictional people, of course, but set in the real world?
Actually, honestly, Alpha, I didn't decide anything. Um, I really didn't decide anything. And but then when I was writing, something seemed to fit in that moment. And also, if you're writing about Kathmandu, I
Mm,
think just the setting is magical because
wow.
you want to write about Rani Pokhri, it has a story of its own. You want to write
Yeah.
about Pashupati, it has a story. And I think if you're writing about a city, and this is why I'm not a big fan of a particular kind of research, because if you
Mm,
research Kathmandu, you don't get its urban legend. You get, literary kings and Malla kings and this king and interesting as those are, they're not they're not they're not what a city is made of. People don't go about talking about temples and streets in those ways. I actually remember when my brothers were growing up, and I had three brothers. My mother used to worry about the whole Tamil area so much, and she would say, "Na jani uta, na jani, it's not." Um, and then the whole story of the Kichkandi would float around. Chabilma, there was
mm,
Kichkandis. Tamil was full of Kichkandis, apparently. Ranipukri area was full of Kichkandis. And all of these were, of course, to keep men away from what were considered probably loose women. Uh, but but so when I was writing about Kathmandu, I just realized that if I really want to write about Rani Pokri, I have to write about Kichkandis. And
mm,
Kichkandis are magical creatures. And so it just became magical. Similarly, when I was writing about the Madhis, you cannot write about the Madhis without writing about songs. because
Mm.
we are a community of singers. We are forever singing. Everything is about singing. And all our songs are lewd and I think they're expressions of all the repression that women in Madhis go through, and Madhis is very, very oppressive towards its women. Um, but the women therefore sing absolutely carefree songs. So I think that's where they find freedom. And so if you want to write about the Madhis, you have to write about the songs, and the songs are magical. So then it becomes magical. So I really, really did not I did not plan anything. It's
Mm.
just that I wanted to write as honestly as I could about a place and about a community. And you know, the king, for example, when we were young, when we were little, when I was a really little kid, like 7, 8 years old, everybody told me that Virendra is the avatar of Vishnu. And if you look at his feet, then you will see Shankha on it. And I believed that. Like I always was like, oh my God, if I ever get to look at the feet of my king, there will be Shankha on it.
Mm.
And he was never a human being. So I never thought of him as a human being. I always thought of him as this half
Yeah.
god, half, and in my head, he was like some Ikshadhari Nagin, Din Bhari becomes human being and Rati Rati becomes Vishnu. So then if
Ah.
I'm writing about that, if I was
Mm.
writing about him, it became magical just because that's how I saw him as a child.
Mm.
And and so I
Yeah.
was trying to, in the list of questions you sent me, you asked me, what does it mean? You said that I have said in the past that one should write authentically, and you asked
Yeah.
how does one write authentically?
Authentically.
Yeah, and I think this is how, like, if you are trying to write about a child's image of a king, and your own image of a king was that he becomes king in the morning and he becomes God at night, then write about that. Like,
Mm.
don't write about things you read somewhere or which seem appropriate, or you know. And and if you, I think if you're writing from a child's perspective, half your world is magic, anyways, because
Yeah.
child doesn't understand. They're all about everything is magical. Um, I remember my father was the handsomest man in the world as far as I knew, and my mom was prettier than anybody else. And that itself is magical, that you have
Yeah.
mom and dad who are prettier and handsomer than anybody in the world. That's magic, right? Um, so I think that's what I mean by authentic is uh, right what you how you knew it and how you knew it rather than how somebody else knows
Yeah.
it or feels it. I don't
How you're told you're supposed to know something as
know.
compared to, how you think.
You
Wow.
know what?
Yeah. I think it's
And
very
all the
different.
time yeah, and I think it's half our knowledge of the world is incorrect, especially our personal knowledge of the world is probably incorrect. But then all knowledge is incorrect. So then
Mm.
you might as well talk about your own incorrectedness than somebody else's incorrectedness. That's okay.
Yeah. How it's very difficult to retain that childlike wonder, how we looked at the world. And I love magic stories since when I was like young. And, if I would have a
I
magic
do too.
power, I would fly. Yeah. Do you have any suggestions to retain that childlike wonder or to be able to, access it after many years of being told, oh, this is how you're supposed to see the world? Or how do
No,
you
I
try
don't,
to?
because I have lost it myself. I think so. I have no way to answer that question. But I do think that as writers, as artists, maybe not just as writers, but as
Mm-hmm.
artists, we have the privilege of trying to live it, you know,
Mm.
and sitting down and recreating it for yourself is, I think that's such a privilege that an artist has. And of course, all of us lose it with time. Like I've definitely lost it. One thing that has helped me is that I teach young kids. I'm a
Mm.
teacher by profession. And that's been really nice because teaching young kids means I get to see a little bit of the world through their eyes. and it's always twinkling and it's always ideal and it's always the world is so, black and white in their version sometimes. And so then I steal from it. I also have a young child. I mean, he's no longer young. I mean, he is young. He's 16. But, he's going through that phase where friends are above everything. And, and the magic of friendship. You have to be that young. That magic of friendship exists at that age. So I get to see it through him. And so I think a little bit of it is that. A little bit of it is allowing yourself to be silly and not taking yourself too
Yeah.
seriously. That I have managed. I've forgotten how the magic of the world, but I have not forgotten how to be silly, I think. So
So that kind of like that kind of fills in the gap of and
a
yeah,
little bit, a
a
little
little
bit.
bit. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my main something that's been coming up in our conversation throughout right from the start is like observing the world and then observing people around us being curious and now of course being a little silly, not taking ourselves too seriously, which is something that I tend to do sometimes. So yeah, note to self, making a mental note, yeah, be a little silly and don't worry so much about putting everything in like, something that I guess writers and artists are concerned about is how everything has to make sense, how everything we are writing or creating has to take a particular form or has to be useful. And it is so humbling to know from your experience that, you didn't know you were writing a book. You were just writing because you loved that. And a friend had to tell you that, oh, yeah, this is, a book. This has to take this particular kind of form. So that shows so much about being in the process if we keep showing up
Yes,
for
I
our
do.
work.
I do think that the process is way more fun than the product. I mean, the product is stressful because it's out. And
Yeah.
suddenly, when I was writing, my stresses were all about, oh, my sentences don't make sense, or did I get this right? And there was a challenge to that, which is fascinating. The product is also a great thing, but it's very stressful. I mean, this is my first book, and I remember when it first came out, the first month, it didn't sell at all. And I went into this sort of a black hole. I was like, oh no.
Oh,
And I got so stressed about it. It took me a few months, I think, to remind myself that this book is no longer quite belongs to me, and it will have its own life. And I can't run after it and attach myself to it like this because it'll drive me nuts. But the process really belonged to me. It really belonged to me, and I could obsess about it and I could do things. And right now I think I'm writing a short story. I'm not sure. Uh, and I'm absolutely obsessing about it right now. And I'm loving the obsession. But once it's done and once it's out in the world, then I think one has to learn to just not even remember it, I think. The day I stop
wow.
remembering it, that will be the best day.
Wow. Oh my. And that's how do you deal with that though? Um,
It's stressful. I mean, maybe because I'm new at this, but it's not stressful anymore. Now I have no stress. But the first couple of months I was stressed like hell.
Now you're, getting pro at it.
No, no, now thankfully I have so much grading to do for my schoolwork and I have so much work. I have no time to sit and think about something that's I'm not connected to on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's a good thing. Is like I'm really glad I have a day job. Otherwise, I'd go a little nuts.
Wow. Hmm. The product may not belong to us as like artists, but the process does. Wow. Yeah, because yeah, the death of the author, that
Yeah,
idea that when you
absolutely.
put out something, it's like which is
Yeah, and
um
it's true. It's true. It's something I'm learning. It's something I'm learning that really does not belong to you. And there's nothing you can do about it.
mm,
And the more at peace you are with that, better for you. But the process is all yours. So you do what you have to do.
yeah.
And that's where the fun is.
Yeah, wow. The process is the only thing that belongs to us. That's such a powerful idea. Yeah, because what happens to our work, nobody knows. It might just get lost in oblivion or somewhere in the internet when we put out our stuff. But the process, yeah, that is nobody can take that away from, people who create.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow. Would you like to move to the rapid fire, after that? Wonderful,
sure.
deep, and nourishing conversation. So many things to reflect on. I'll be thinking about it like for a very long time, and I'll come back to the podcast again and again. So let's move to the rapid fire. I have a few questions, mostly centered around like writing and art, and I've not shared this with you, so rapid fires are secret. It
I'm a
just
little
comes out
scared.
at the
Okay.
moment. No, please do not be scared. So shall we begin?
Yes.
If you were not a writer, what profession would you take up?
Well, I am a teacher, and I think that's the profession I would take up. I really, really like teaching. But if this is a fantasy world, then I would be a dancer, and I would,
Mm.
yes, set
Wow.
the stage on fire or something. Yeah. But except that
Wow.
I'm really bad at dancing. Yeah. But I love it.
Wow.
I'd be a dancer.
You'd be a dancer. Great. Yeah, I think. Do you dance? Like, what?
Yeah, I dance in the sense that I do chapri dancing. You put on the music and I jump all over the room. And but I can do that all night, jump all over the room. And I really enjoy it. It's my stress buster. Yeah, yeah. I'd be a dancer.
You'd be a
And I'd
dancer.
actually know how to dance. Yes.
Wow. A book you've reread the most times, if there's any you can recall.
A book I have reread the most times. I think I have reread, read and reread Crime and Punishment 5 or 6 times. So that might be the book I've reread the most. Uh, I'm a big Dostoevsky fan. Uh, yeah, I think Crime and Punishment. I really should be rereading Brothers Karamazov more, but I get scared and then I don't. Yeah, that's the book I've reread the most time.
Crime and Punishment. I read that book with two other friends. So we were in college and we had this like three people book club, which was just basically three people reading, like sharing books and reading. And that's how I ended up reading that book as well. The best writing advice you have received.
Less is more.
Hmm, less is more. Okay.
Less is more.
Now, something related to that previous question, a writing advice you would like to give.
Write what you know as genuinely as you can.
Yeah, be authentic and don't lose that magic.
That really is my mantra. That really is my mantra to myself. To myself. I don't know how it works for anybody else, but for me, uh, there was a time a few years back where I gave myself a writing exercise where I told myself you have to write one true sentence a day. It was one of the hardest things I've done. You have to write one true sentence a day. And yeah, so essentially that, write many true sentences.
True sentences. Wow. Okay. Write one true sentence a day. Can I try that too at some point in
Yes,
time?
yes, I should go back to it. I haven't done it for many years. I should go back to it.
Yeah. But how would you define like true though?
So, for example, let's say I'm mad at my husband, right? And I want to write about it, then I shouldn't be sugarcoating anything. I should truly write about how I'm feeling, whether the blame falls on me, on whoever, or like to truly, truly, truly write about it. And then I don't know. Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
most of the time I don't know, I'm sure it's true of everybody. My thoughts can be very messy and not nice.
Mm.
And those are not the kind of things I want to put down on paper because I'm always afraid somebody else will see it and I will offend them. But I think when I can put it down, knowing that I will offend somebody and still be able to put it down, that that's a sentence I'm most proud of. Of
Ah,
course, then I lock the notebook in a very, very deep trunk and put a very big lock on it and everything. But the sentence is still there. It's still
ah,
there.
okay. Yeah, I mean, writing is very deep and yeah, it's very philosophical too, finding ourselves. Last question for the rapid fire round. What is the most important thing that we should do as writers, like new writers or aspiring writers or any writer?
Right?
Wow, right?
That's something I have to get to myself. But um, yeah, I think the most important thing as writers you have to do is write. Not think about writing, not dream about writing, not plan about writing, but actually sit down and write. And it doesn't matter if what you've written is good or bad. It doesn't matter. I think the fact that you've written is the most important thing. Now, that is an advice I have to give myself, and I have to follow myself because I don't do it. Yes.
I love to dream about writing.
Yes, me too. I love to fight with the whole world about it and say it's because you all don't give me any time that I don't get time. I have all kinds of excuses, but I won't write. So
True. So yeah, writers of the world, please write. That's the only thing we
we
need to
just,
do.
I think I am in awe and have most respect for people who are disciplined. I think there is such freedom in it, because you've done something for the day, you're free to do other things. But because I have struggled with discipline, I find myself bound. Like I'm not free. I can't be free of it. I can't say that, oh, I've written for the day, so I'm free. I can now watch 38 movies. I can't do that because I'm watching 38 movies and the whole time I'm thinking, oh shit, I didn't write. And so then I feel like I'm bonded to it. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes absolute sense. Yes, watching 38 movies and not writing and thinking you have to write. That's yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
On
yes,
the other
you
hand,
have to write.
if you'd written a paragraph in the morning, and then you'd watched 38 movies, you'd be free. You'd be mentally in the 38 movie. My mom used to say that when we were little, she'd give us sag to eat every day, like all good Kathmandu people. And then she'd say, eat your sag, and then you can, for the rest of the day, not eat. So you'd be free of eating because you eat your sag.
Yeah, that's true. So yes, write first, and then you can do anything else that you want. Watch movies, go out, just relax. I think that's such a great place to end our conversation, like write, you start with writing and then we end with writing. Thank you so much for joining me. It was wonderful to have this conversation with you. So many
No,
takeaways.
Alpha, wait. I just remembered the book that I've read the most number of times.
Oh,
Because that's not crime and punishment. I'm like, that's
okay.
not true. That can't
Correction.
be true. Yes, I'm sorry, correction. The book I have read the most number of times is The Emperor of All Maladies by Siddharth Mukherjee.
Oh,
I
okay.
flip it all the time. It's something that I read at least twice a year, not cover to cover, but I will open it and I will read sections of it, and I think I have read it horribly too many number of times. That's the
Wow.
book I've read the most number of times.
Great correction. And you remembered it just in
Correction.
time as we were
I
ending.
made it. I made it. I made
Yay, you
it.
made it. Thank you so much for
Yes.
joining me. It was lovely having this conversation, and I'll be thinking about all the things you said and we've spoken about like in the days to come. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.